The wind carried dust like faint smoke as Grant Avery rode into Three Stones, a frontier town too quiet for the trouble it whispered about. Evening sun burned low behind the buttes, casting long bands of orange across Main Street, where shutters hung crooked and men spoke in low guarded tones. Grant had seen towns like this before, places where the land looked peaceful but the people looked hunted. He dismounted outside the livery, boots hitting the ground with the weight of a man who'd ridden hard for days. His coat was worn from miles of sun, his eyes sharper than the badge tucked beneath it. Grant didn't flaunt his authority. He simply carried it like he carried every scar, silent, heavy, and earned. He stepped into the Dry Spur Saloon, where piano keys lay still under a cloth and the patrons stiffened at the sight of a stranger. Conversations that had been murmuring like creek water suddenly went dry. A rancher by the bar lifted his hat in a slow, wary greeting. "You're not from around here." "No," Grant replied, voice steady. "Just passing through. Looking for information." That word, information, made three men straighten. Another stepped away from a corner table, heading for the door as though he had urgent business elsewhere. Grant continued. "I hear there's trouble near an unclaimed valley north of town. Folks are calling it Calder Hollow." The bartender froze long enough to betray fear. "That place ain't for riding," he muttered. "Ain't for talking neither." Grant gave a patient nod. "Rumor says land's about to get stolen." The bartender's eyes flicked to the rancher at the bar, who leaned in, breath rough with dust and nerves. "Things disappear out there," the rancher said. "Lowing cattle, wagons, men. You want justice cleaned up, ride somewhere else." Grant's jaw tightened. He'd heard versions of that warning across every county he'd crossed. Folks always advised him to leave matters be. But for 5 years, since the day his brother had lost his own land to forged claims, Grant had been hunting down every syndicate that profited from lies, greed, and quiet violence. It wasn't just work to him. It was a debt he could never quite pay. He tipped the rancher his thanks and stepped outside. Night was gathering fast, thin stars brightening above a sky the color of cooled iron. If Calder Hollow held answers, he wasn't waiting for daylight. Grant mounted his horse and urged him toward the northern trail. Sagebrush bent in the growing wind as he left town behind. The land sloped into a maze of rock and juniper, the world narrowing into hushed ravines where even the crickets seemed to hold their breath. The deeper he rode, the stranger the silence felt. No birds, no distant cattle, not even the echo of night insects. Just a hollow stillness that pressed on the ears. A mile farther he spotted something odd, tracks in the dirt, too fresh to be from wild game, too light to be from heavy ranch wagons. Someone lived out here. Someone who wanted to remain unseen. Grant followed the faint path through a curtain of cedar until the land opened unexpectedly, as if the earth itself guarded a secret. Before him lay a valley, not barren like the rumors claimed, but alive. Green, sheltered, and impossibly untouched. And in the heart of it stood a small homestead. A weather-worn cabin. A barn patched by skilled, determined hands. Smoke curling from a chimney. Lantern light glowed warm behind curtained windows. Livestock grazed peacefully under the twilight. This was no abandoned hollow. This was someone's fiercely protected world. Grant guided his horse closer, watching for signs of movement. He didn't wait long. A figure stepped out from behind the barn and raised a rifle with decisive calm. "Stop right there," a woman's voice ordered. Strong, steady, and unmistakably unafraid. The rifle didn't shake. Grant halted, hands visible. "Not looking for trouble," he said. "Name's Grant Avery. Just following a lead. I don't care about your name." The woman stepped into the lantern light, revealing sharp cheekbones, a braid over one shoulder, and eyes that held both exhaustion and unyielding resolve. "No one comes to this valley without a reason. Turn around." "I heard this land was unclaimed," Grant said carefully. Her jaw flexed. "You heard wrong. And if you keep asking questions, You'll regret riding this far. Grant noted the tension in her stance, and something else. Fear buried beneath defiance. He dismounted slowly. If this is your homestead, someone's planning to take it. For a heartbeat, her eyes flickered. Then the hardened mask returned. You don't know what you're talking about. And you're not welcome here. Leave before dark finishes falling. Grant studied her, the hidden homestead, the valley that shouldn't exist, and knew he'd found the beginning of something dangerous. And something important. He tipped his hat and backed away. But not without noticing the corner of parchment peeking from her porch rail. Weathered, creased, and stamped with a seal he recognized all too well. A forged land deed. This valley wasn't just a rumor. It was a target. And the woman was already in the crossfire. Grant left Calder Hollow under a moon just beginning to rise, its pale glow stretching thin shadows across the valley floor. June Calder, if that was her real name, had stood her ground like someone who'd been forced to do it too many times. She'd watched him go with a rifle steady in her hands and distrust steady in her eyes. He didn't blame her. Out here, strangers didn't bring comfort. They brought questions, claims, and trouble. But the forged deed he'd glimpsed on her porch railing, that was no small thing. He'd seen too many of them in his line of work, always carrying the same signature ink, the same fake land survey marks, the same subtle watermark that only men like him had learned to spot. Someone wanted her land. And they were close. When Grant rode back into Three Stones, lamps were guttering low and storefronts had gone dark. Only the sheriff's office still held a thin slit of light. He considered going in, asking about Calder Hollow, maybe even about the woman who lived there. But he already knew what he'd find in that office. A sheriff with tied hands, or worse, tied loyalties. Grant kept riding. He found a patch of ground under a cottonwood on the edge of town, tethered his horse, and settled onto his bedroll. Sleep didn't come. He watched the stars drag slowly across the sky and pieced together the threads he'd gathered, rumors of disappearing cattle, the hush in town, the valley people feared, the homestead no one admitted existed. At dawn he rode back. He kept to the tree line, studying the land before making himself known. Smoke rose from June's chimney. Chickens scratched near the coop. A woman alone out here had to work non-stop just to keep the place alive. Even from a distance, he could see her moving with purpose, checking the livestock, hauling water, tending a life she'd built with her own hands. She didn't see him until he stepped into the open. Her rifle appeared instantly. "I told you yesterday," she said, voice steady but eyes tight from a night with too little rest. "I don't need visitors, least of all lawmen." Grant lifted his hands again. "I came unarmed." "Doesn't matter. Words break worse than bullets." "True," he admitted. "But truth can also save your land." Her eyes narrowed to slits. "You think I don't know what this place is worth?" "I think you know exactly what it's worth. And that someone wants to take it." For a moment, the wind was the only thing that moved. June's shoulders tensed. Not denial, surprise. Something closer to bracing for a blow. "What do you know?" she asked. Grant kept his voice low. "The deed on your porch is forged. Same type used up north. Same group, too. They take whatever they find unguarded or inconvenient to the town's plans." June sucked in a breath. "You shouldn't have seen that. You shouldn't be here at all. You can't face a syndicate alone." She steadied her rifle. "Watch me." Grant stepped closer, not enough to challenge, just enough to show he wasn't leaving. "If they've marked your land, you'll have more than forged papers to worry about. Property disputes are the first strike. Violence usually follows. I don't need your help. Maybe not. But you're going to get their trouble whether you want it or not." June's jaw tightened. She looked toward her barn, toward the valley she clearly loved and feared losing. Grant could see the calculation in her eyes. Keep her secret, keep her distance, keep surviving alone. But secrets didn't stop men greedy for land. And solitude didn't stop syndicates. "Why are you really here?" she asked quietly. Grant paused, deciding how much truth to give a woman who'd given him nothing but warnings. "I track forged deeds," he said. "I follow land theft rings. And every trail for the past 3 weeks has led straight to this hollow." June lowered the rifle a fraction. Not acceptance, just a shift from direct threat to guarded assessment. "You still haven't told me why you care what happens to me." Grant almost said the truth, that he cared about anyone the syndicate targeted, that every victim was a reminder of the brother he hadn't saved. But he kept that to himself. Instead, he answered, "Because the law is supposed to protect folks like you." Her laugh was sharp. "The law killed my father. I'm done trusting it." Before Grant could respond, a sudden crash tore through the quiet. Livestock shrieked. June spun, rifle raised. "Coyotes," she muttered. Grant's gut told him otherwise. They ran to the pen, and found 3 rails of fencing kicked in, hoofprints scattered, and one of her sheep bleeding from a slash that was no animal's work. Boot prints. More than one set. June's face drained of color. "They found me," she whispered. Grant drew in a steadying breath. "Then it's time to stop running." She swallowed hard, then nodded once. Just once. "Fine," she said. "You can stay. But only outside my land." Grant understood. Trust had to be earned. He set up camp near the edge of her homestead as the sun rose over the valley. 2 strangers bound by danger, both knowing the real fight was just beginning. Grant set his camp just beyond June's fence line, close enough to watch the homestead, far enough to honor the boundary she'd drawn like a line in the dust. He didn't mind. Distance didn't bother a man used to traveling alone from one county of corruption to the next. Besides, the night raid had already confirmed what he suspected. Someone had eyes on this valley. And now they knew June wasn't unprotected. Morning settled slowly across Calder Hollow. Mist clung to the pasture while June moved through her chores with a stiffness that hadn't been there the day before. She carried her rifle slung over her back. She kept glancing toward the broken fencing as if expecting more shadows. Grant watched her work from his fire, boiling coffee that smelled like burnt bark. He didn't offer any. He knew better than to cross into her trust too quickly. Finally, June approached him, rifle still visible, but her spine a little less rigid. "You see anything last night?" she asked. No greeting, no softening. "Tracks leading toward the ridge," Grant replied. "Boot prints. 2 men, maybe 3. They knew where to strike. They moved fast. Professionals." Her jaw clenched. "Then they're not done." "No," he agreed. "They just tested your defenses." June didn't comment. Instead, she gathered fallen branches from near his camp and inspected each with an unspoken purpose, checking if anything looked disturbed. Grant watched her hands. Quick, competent, hardened from years of building a life alone. "You rebuild fences often?" he asked. She shot him a look. "Only when the world insists." Grant hid a faint smile. June hauled the branches back to her property, ignoring the way her arms trembled with exhaustion. 2 nights with little sleep, 1 night of adrenaline, and a morning of forced courage. It was catching up to her. Grant followed her to the break in the fence. "You shouldn't try fixing this alone." "I've done it before." "Not under threat." June hesitated, breath-catching. Then, grudgingly, she stepped aside a few inches. Permission enough. They worked in silence. Grant lifted heavy rails while June hammered posts back into place. The morning sun warmed the valley, but tension hung thicker than heat. Finally, June spoke. "I don't trust you." "I assumed as much. You shouldn't be here." "Probably true. But you came anyway." Grant paused, holding a rail. "Someone needs to stand with you." June's hammer stilled. The sound of birds returned faintly to the valley, like the land itself eased for a moment. But then she shook it off, returning to her work. A badge doesn't make you my guardian. Grant leaned the rail into place. I'm not here as a badge. Just a man who knows how these syndicates operate. June lowered her hammer with a heavy exhale. Then you should know this, I won't run. Not again. This land is all that's left of my family. Grant looked at her, really looked. The exhaustion beneath her strength. The fear beneath her fire. The grief was buried beneath the name she refused to explain. You said your father died over a lawman, Grant said gently. June stiffened. He trusted the wrong one. Trusted a deputy who took bribes to push families out of Goodwaterland. When my father filed a complaint, the deputy made sure no help came. My father died from a bullet meant to warn him. The law called it a dispute gone wrong. I called it murder. Grant swallowed a bitter truth. He'd seen that story before. Too often. You changed your name, he said quietly. To protect yourself. June didn't confirm it. But she didn't deny it either. They finished the fence just before noon. Sweat streaked their brows. Dirt clung to their hands. It felt like they'd fought a small battle. Together. Grant inspected the repaired rail. This will hold for now. It'll hold because of you, June admitted, voice low as if confessing to weakness. Grant stepped back, giving her space again. If they come back, I'll be ready. June looked toward the ridge, toward the hidden world beyond her valley. They will come back. Grant moved toward his camp. Then I will too. But he didn't get far. A distant crack echoed across the hollow. Sharp, definite, unmistakably gunfire. June froze. They're close. Grant grabbed his rifle. Stay behind me. No, she snapped, lifting her own. I fight for what's mine. They ran toward the sound, down the slope past the barn across the shimmering grass, until they reached the far edge of the valley where the land dipped into a narrow ravine. Smoke curled from a still warm gunshot in the dirt. Tracks fled into the brush. Men had come close, too close. Grant's jaw set like stone. They're scouting, he said. Measuring your defenses. Watching our patterns. Planning something bigger. June's voice trembled with anger. Then let them come. Grant turned to her, meeting her fire with steady resolve. You don't have to stand alone anymore. She stared at him a long moment. Something in her expression shifting, softening, then hardening again. Fine, she said quietly. You can stay. But don't expect trust. I don't. He glanced toward the valley that suddenly felt far smaller. But I expect a fight. And for the first time since their uneasy alliance began, June didn't argue. The next morning broke warm and strangely calm, as if the valley was holding its breath. Grant rose before the sun, scanning the ridgeline for movement. Nothing. No smoke. No shifting silhouettes. No glint of metal. Yet he felt the pressure of eyes on them. Watching, waiting. June emerged from the cabin with her sleeves rolled, her hair braided tight, and her jaw set in that stubborn tilt she wore like armor. She didn't greet him, but she didn't avoid him either. That alone felt like progress. We need to repair the north fence, she said. The raid weakened more posts than we thought. Grant nodded, grabbing his tools. Lead the way. As they worked, June kept glancing toward the hills, muscles taut. Grant recognized the look. It wasn't simple fear. It was someone who had lived too long expecting the worst and was still preparing for it. When he lifted a heavy beam to replace a cracked post, June steadied the other end. Their hands almost brushed. She pulled back fast, as if contact could burn her. You're too alert for someone who's had only minor trouble before, Grant said, voice casual. June shot him a narrow look. I've lived alone for years. Alert keeps you alive. He hammered a nail into place. Alert, or hunted. Her steps faltered. The hammer hung loose in her grip. Grant continued. Last night's gunfire wasn't a warning. That was checking the distance. They wanted to see how fast we'd respond. We responded fast enough, June muttered. Not for long. They'll escalate. June didn't answer, but the truth settled heavily between them. When the fence repairs were finished, Grant walked toward the spring house tucked behind the homestead. Something had bothered him yesterday. An odd lushness to the grass, the coolness in the air. The spring ran stronger than any shallow valley had a right to. He crouched, brushing aside reeds. Water gushed clear from a rocky seam, strong enough to irrigate twice the land June claimed. It wasn't just a water source. It was rare, valuable, strategic, the kind of resource men would kill for. June approached slowly, apprehension tightening her posture. You weren't supposed to find that. Does anyone else know about it? Grant asked. They knew before my family ever settled here. Her voice cracked, not with weakness but with buried fury. When we wouldn't sell, they forced us out, burned our barn, shot our livestock. One of their men told my father the valley would be theirs, whether we handed it over or they took it from our graves. Grant felt heat rise behind his ribs. Your father died protecting this? He died because he believed people could be fair. He filed a complaint with the sheriff then. She laughed bitterly. The sheriff filed it right into the fire, and accepted a gift for his trouble. And you came back under a different name so they wouldn't know? June swallowed. Calder is my real name. My mother's name. I took it after my father died. I wanted this place to have at least one name they hadn't poisoned. Grant looked around the valley. Lush, hidden, fertile. A place worth fighting for. But also a place that had been fought over before. June, he said softly, this spring alone is enough to make every syndicate in the county want you gone. I know. Her voice dropped to a whisper. That's why I don't trust anyone. Grant considered his next words carefully. Then the fact you're telling me this means something. June looked away quickly. It means you needed to know what you're fighting for. Grant rose, stepping closer. Not touching. Just close enough to be heard without the valley carrying the words. I told you yesterday, I'm not here as a badge. She hesitated. Then why? Grant searched for the truth that wouldn't scare her off. Because you remind me of what justice is supposed to look like. You're standing your ground. Alone. Honest. Stubborn as a mule. A faint, unwilling smile tugged at her mouth. And you shouldn't have to fend off devils by yourself. Silence stretched, not uncomfortable this time. June exhaled slowly. I appreciate the help. Even if I can't say it right. You just did. Grant turned toward the ridge when a flicker of movement caught his eye. Sun glinting off metal. A distant figure ducked behind a boulder. Someone's watching, he murmured. June stood beside him, face pale. They're waiting for the right moment. Grant's pulse hardened. Then we don't give them one. That evening, as sunlight faded behind the peaks, June stood on her porch while Grant walked the perimeter of the homestead. Something in the air felt different. Charged, almost hopeful, though danger still pressed like storm clouds. When Grant returned to the porch, June met his eyes with quiet resolve. You said justice isn't always the law, she said. No, he answered. Sometimes it's the line a person refuses to cross. June stepped closer. Close enough for trust to pass between them like the warm glow of her lantern. Then stand with me, she whispered. Not as a lawman, but as someone who believes in what I'm fighting for. Grant nodded once. Firm. Certain. I already am. By the next morning, clouds had rolled over the valley like bruises gathering strength. June stepped onto her porch with a rifle strapped across her back. Grant stood near the barn, polishing his revolver with slow, deliberate strokes, movement that looked calm on the outside but came from a man expecting a fight. He caught June's glance. Riders came close last night. I heard them, she said. They didn't cross the fence. They will. June didn't argue. She simply nodded once and headed toward the pasture. Grant followed, keeping his eyes on the tree line. The valley felt smaller today. More fragile. More watched. When they reached the north ridge, 2 horses stood waiting. Not theirs. No riders. Just tethered mounts, saddles dusted and marked with a symbol Grant recognized immediately. A sunburst brand. The syndicate's calling card. Bold of them to leave their horses here, June whispered, throat tight. They wanted us to find them. A rustle in the brush snapped Grant's attention left. 3 men stepped out, hands raised just enough to show empty palms, but not enough to hide the arrogance in their smirks. The front man wore a town deputy's badge. Grant's jaw went rigid. June's breath hitched. The deputy tipped his hat lazily. "Morning, miss." His gaze lingered with false politeness. "Or should I say, Miss Lark Reynolds?" June went completely still. Grant stepped forward, voice low. "State your purpose, deputy." "Oh, I'm just here delivering news." The deputy grinned widely. "See, we've done some digging. Turns out this homestead ain't legally registered under any Calder. Never was. But we did find a claim tied to Miss Reynolds here. Shame that she's been hiding under a false identity. Shame that her claim expired 3 years ago. Shame that the law can't protect someone who lies on government documents." June shook her head slowly like she'd been struck. My father filed." "Your father filed and forfeited," the deputy cut in. "Abandonment of property. You left the valley for years. That means it's up for grabs. And wouldn't you know it, he pulled a rolled parchment from his coat. Someone filed a new, perfectly legal claim yesterday. He held it out not to June, but to Grant. Grant didn't take it. The deputy smirked. Syndicates got their signatures neat this time. Sheriff already signed off. Stamps clean. All legal. All done." June backed away a step, her breath coming fast and sharp. "Grant, what does this mean?" Grant didn't answer. His silence was answer enough. The deputy chuckled. "It means, Miss Reynolds, that you are officially trespassing. And your friend here, he's obligated to enforce the law." Grant's jaw clenched hard enough to ache. The deputy leaned closer. "Unless, of course, he wants to lose his badge." June looked at Grant, eyes full of betrayal, and she tried to choke down. "Is this true? You have to side with them." Grant tried to speak, tried to explain. But the law was the law on paper, and corrupt paper carried more weight in this county than truth. June stepped back farther. "Tell me you're not bound to this." Grant forced the words out. "June, if this claim is recognized, I can't override it." Her face broke, not loudly, not dramatically, but in a quiet collapse of everything she had dared to trust. "So you came here to help," she whispered, staring at him as if seeing something else entirely. "But when the law tells you to take their side, you'll take it." "June, listen." "No," she raised a shaking hand to silence him. "I knew better. I knew trusting a lawman would end the same way it did for my father." The deputy beamed satisfied. "Your friend here's got good sense. Best leave the valley peacefully, Miss Reynolds. You've got till sundown tomorrow." June turned away, voice thin but steady. "Get off my land." The deputy tipped his hat. "Happy to. We'll be back with paperwork." They mounted up and rode off, dust curling behind them like laughter. June walked past Grant toward her cabin, step stiff with fury and heartbreak. She didn't look at him. "June," he called. She didn't stop. "June, let me explain." She reached her porch, opened her door and spoke without turning. "You were supposed to help me save this place, Grant. Not hand it to them." The door slammed shut. Silence swallowed the valley. Grant stared at the closed door, heart hammering with a truth he could no longer deny. For the first time in his life, the law he carried was the very thing destroying what was right. And June. June now believed he was the enemy. The valley dimmed early that evening, clouds swallowing what little sunlight remained. Grant sat beneath the cottonwood near his camp, badge heavy in his hand, the metal catching the faint orange glow of his dying fire. He had carried that badge through 5 counties, dozens of dusty towns, and more corruption than any one man should have had to witness. It wasn't just a symbol. It had been his shield, his compass, the last piece of honor his brother had told him to never let go. Now it felt like poison. Across the pasture, June's cabin glowed faintly through drawn curtains. He saw her silhouette moving inside, slow, deliberate, as if every motion cost her something. She hadn't spoken to him since slamming the door. She hadn't even glanced his way during chores. But he could feel the distance between them like a wound. A wound he had caused. Grant closed his hand around the badge until the edges bit into his palm. "What good are you," he muttered to it, "if you protect thieves and punish the innocent?" Wind rustled softly through the grass. No answer. No absolution. He stood abruptly. He wasn't a man who waited for fate to decide everything. He crossed his camp in quick strides, found his saddlebags, and pulled from them a folded letter, the authorization appointing him to the circuit investigator role. It carried the signature of the very man tied to 2 earlier syndicates. Had he ignored that coincidence? Or had he ignored the dread that came with it? Grant inhaled sharply. Enough. He walked to the edge of the valley, the border where the ridge cast long shadows. Then, with a steady breath, he dropped the badge onto a flat stone. Moonlight slid across the metal. Cold. Detached. Grant brought his boot down hard. The badge cracked. Bent. Split into 2 pieces. His past and his duty broke with it. A strange quiet followed. Like the earth itself stopped to listen. Grant whispered into the silence. "Justice doesn't come from metal." He left the broken badge where it lay and headed straight toward town. 3 stones slept lightly, if at all. Too many folks had learned to stay alert after dark. Grant tied his horse behind the livery and slipped down the alley toward the sheriff's office. The windows glowed faintly. A lamp burned inside. He approached the half-open door and listened. Voices drifted out. "Tomorrow she'll be gone," the deputy's oily drawl said. "Paperwork's airtight. Sheriff's stamp will hold long as no one questions it." The sheriff grunted. "You sure the new claimant paid the full fee?" "He paid double," the deputy replied. "Said he wants the woman gone by sundown, by fire if needed." Grant's stomach turned to ice. Fire. June's father had died after a deputy's betrayal. Now they meant to finish the job with her. Grant kicked the door open. The lamp rattled. The sheriff jerked upright. The deputy reached for his holster, but Grant already had him pinned against the wall, forearm crushing his windpipe. "You're burning her out?" Grant growled. The deputy sputtered. "Avery, this is." Grant slammed him harder. "Try lying." "I dare you." The sheriff reached for his gun. Grant drew his faster. "Sit," he barked. The sheriff froze, then slowly lowered himself behind the desk, hand shaking. Grant's voice was low, lethal. "Show me the forged claim." The sheriff swallowed and slid open a drawer. Deeds, maps, and letters spilled out. Documents stamped with false seals, signatures Grant recognized from months of chasing the syndicate. He grabbed the stack, rifling through it. Then he found it. June's false forfeiture. A fake surveyor's certification. A new owner's claim, signed just yesterday. All lies. Grant took every document and shoved them into his coat. "If anything happens to June Calder, anything, you'll answer to every court between here and the state capitol." The deputy spat blood. "You don't have authority without your badge." Grant leaned in close, eyes cold as iron. "I don't need a badge to stop you." He stepped back, keeping his gun trained on them as he backed out the door. As he mounted his horse outside, thunder rumbled over the desert horizon. Lightning flashed. And beneath it, he saw what chilled him to the bone. 5 riders heading toward the valley, torches blazing against the storm-dark sky. They were already on their way. Grant's heart slammed against his ribs. He dug his heels into his horse. Go! Go! The animal shot forward, hooves pounding against earth and stone. The valley lay ahead. June's homestead, June's life, June herself, an ember in the dark about to be smothered by fire and greed. Lightning split the sky again. Torches bobbed closer. Smoke drifted on the wind. Grant pushed his horse harder. Harder still. "Hold on, June," he whispered through clenched teeth. "I'm coming." The valley burned orange under the flicker of torches. Smoke coiled into the night sky like serpents, carrying the acrid scent of hay and splintered wood. Grant rode hard across the open field, eyes locked on the homestead, where June stood on the porch, rifle in hand, every nerve taut, every muscle ready. She spotted him and exhaled sharply, a mixture of relief and fear. "Grant!" she called, voice cutting through the roar of wind and flames. "I'm here," he yelled back. "Stay low." The first men burst from the tree lane, torches swinging dangerously close to the barn. Their laughter was cruel, overconfident, and certain of victory. Grant's pulse surged as he spurred his horse forward, rifle drawn. "Back!" June shouted, firing over the heads of approaching men. A gunshot cracked the night, and one torch clattered to the ground, flames lashing at the grass. The attack had begun, but Grant refused to panic. They were professionals. But he knew the land and he knew June. And now he had a choice: rely on law or rely on instinct and courage. He chose the latter. Grant dismounted near the barn, dragging the first syndicate member into cover. He fired with precision, keeping the attackers at bay. Sparks from gunfire lit the smoke, giving the valley a surreal, almost apocalyptic glow. June moved with unexpected agility, ducking behind barrels and returning fire. Her eyes, fierce and determined, met Grant's for a brief second. They weren't just fighting for property anymore. They were fighting for survival, for dignity, for justice. Grant dove toward the porch where he had glimpsed the forged deeds days earlier. Pulling the stack from his coat, he waved it high. "Everyone," he shouted, "look at this. This land belongs to her. All of it." The men hesitated. Confusion flickered across their faces. Townsfolk, drawn by the smoke and gunfire, began emerging from the trees and distant ridges, murmurs of disbelief traveling the valley like wildfire. Grant's voice rose. "This is her land. These deeds are forged. She's been fighting for what's hers, and she will not be run off by cheats and liars." The attackers faltered, unsure now with witnesses closing in. Their confidence cracked, and for the first time, fear appeared in their eyes. June, seizing the moment, fired another warning shot. "Get back or face the consequences." Grant reached her side. "We hold them here until the town sees the truth," he said, his jaw tight with determination. The leader of the syndicate, realizing their plan was unraveling, tried to grab the deeds. Grant blocked him with a heavy swing of his rifle. The man staggered, and in that moment, the townsfolk surged forward, surrounding the would-be arsonists. Shouts echoed, and the sheriff arrived, forced into action by public outrage. Grant breathed hard, hands shaking, sweat and soot mixing on his face. June lowered her rifle slightly, eyes softening as she glanced at him. "You came back," she whispered. "I never left," Grant replied, voice steady despite the chaos around them. One by one, the syndicate members were apprehended, their torches extinguished, their schemes exposed. The homestead remained untouched, smoke curling from the chimney, stubborn and alive. Grant and June stood at the edge of the porch, surveying the aftermath. The valley was still smoldering in parts, but the homestead had survived. Their eyes met, and for the first time, no words were needed. "You saved this place," June said quietly, voice trembling. "You saved me." Grant shook his head. "No, June. You saved it yourself. I just made sure they didn't get in the way. The sun began to rise, casting golden streaks across the valley. The night of fire and fear had passed, leaving something raw, unbroken, and undeniably theirs. Grant leaned on the railing beside her, feeling the weight of what had been fought for and what had been chosen. In that valley, among the smoke, scorched grass, and silent witnesses, justice had been reclaimed. Not by law, not by authority, but by courage, loyalty, and a refusal to let greed define what was right. June's hand brushed against his, tentative, yet unafraid. So, what now? Grant's lips curved faintly. Now we rebuild. Together. And for the first time since he'd entered the valley, Grant felt the valley itself exhale. The danger was gone, for now, but the bond forged in fire and courage would remain, as indestructible as the land June had fought to protect. The valley was quiet the morning after the fire, and the silence carried a sense of renewal. Smoke still curled faintly from a few scorched patches of grass, but the homestead stood firm, untouched except for the marks of the struggle they'd survived. Grant and June walked the perimeter together, assessing the minor repairs the night's chaos had forced upon fences and gates. June's hands, calloused and steady, moved over the posts and rails, while Grant carried spare lumber and tools. Their work was methodical, wordless, and yet charged with a quiet energy. Two people rebuilding not just a homestead, but a sense of safety, trust, and something deeper neither had dared to name before. Think it'll hold? Grant asked, hefting a beam into place. June gave a small, wry smile. It's stronger than it was yesterday. And stronger than the men who tried to take it from me. Grant set the beam, brushing dirt from his hands. He looked at her, at the fierce determination, the resilience, the life she had carved out alone, and realized she had already become the heart of this valley. Her courage had been the spark. He had merely been a companion in the storm. Once the repairs were done, June led Grant inside the cabin. The space was warm, familiar, and full of quiet life. A kettle steaming on the stove, herbs drying near the window, the soft sound of the wind through the cracks in the wood. For the first time since he'd arrived, Grant felt the weight of exhaustion lift. Not from rest, but from knowing the danger was gone, and that they had survived it together. June produced papers from a drawer. She held them out with a hesitant grace. I've registered the homestead. Under my real name. Grant took the documents, scanning the official stamp and the neat signatures. The property was secure. Legally, finally, fully hers. His chest eased. Justice had been restored in a way that mattered, beyond laws, beyond deeds, beyond the threats that had haunted her for years. You did this, he said softly. No, June corrected. We did it. Together. They stood for a moment in silence, listening to the valley around them. The distant bleat of sheep, the rustle of wind through the grass, the faint clatter of a coupe door swinging in the breeze. Life had returned, tempered by fire and fear, yet more resilient than ever. Grant stepped outside, looking toward the ridge. The horizon glowed with early sunlight, painting the peaks with a warm golden hue. It was quiet, peaceful, but not stagnant. He knew challenges would always return. Men greedy for power never slept entirely. But for now, this valley was safe, and the woman who had fought for it stood at its center. Turning back to the cabin, he saw June watching him from the porch, eyes steady, lips curved in a faint, rare smile. Without a word, Grant crossed the small yard. Each step felt deliberate, final, as if he was choosing to stay in this place not out of duty, not out of law, but out of something far deeper. He reached her side, brushing his hand against hers. I'm not leaving, he said simply. June studied him for a heartbeat, then nodded. It wasn't an announcement. It was an acknowledgement. Two lives, hardened by the frontier and shaped by fire, had found common ground. Together, they walked to the edge of the homestead. Grant unrolled plans for a small cabin near hers, a modest structure, simple, sturdy, a home built with care rather than necessity. June leaned close, shoulder brushing his, and for the first time they didn't speak because no words were needed. The promise of presence, of partnership, was enough. The sun climbed higher, filling the valley with warmth. Birds began their hesitant songs. Sheep grazed, unharmed. Smoke from the stove curled lazily into the morning sky. Calder Hollow, once a secret under threat, now stood as a place of life, love, and resilience. Grant finally let himself breathe. He had come seeking justice in a land lawless and corrupt, and in the process he had found something far more enduring. A reason to stay, a place to belong, and a woman whose courage mirrored his own. June glanced at him, her eyes softening. "You fought for me," she said, almost a whisper. "And you taught me why it's worth fighting," Grant replied. The valley stretched before them, wide and open, ready for the life they would build together. The past, the threats, the syndicate, the betrayals, had been swept away by courage, by choice, and by the bond they had forged in the heat of fire and fear. Grant took a step closer, hand brushing hers again. "This is home," he said. June nodded, a faint smile breaking through her resolve. Home. And for the first time, both of them truly believed it. The homestead standing proud, the river glinting faintly, the ridges catching morning light, and settle on two figures side by side, united, unshaken, and ready for whatever the frontier might bring next. Justice had been claimed. Love had been found. The frontier, harsh and relentless, had finally offered them both a place to stand, together. If you enjoyed Grant and June's fight for justice and love on the frontier, hit that like button and subscribe for more Wild West stories that'll keep you on the edge of your seat.